Hello and welcome to Mindful Monday. My name is Allison Knight and I am the health coach for Employee Health Center. The last few weeks we've been talking about allowing things to be, allowing those unpleasant and uncomfortable emotions to exist, to acknowledge them, to invite them in, to explore them with a gentle kindness instead of bottling them up. Notice how our body sensations react to those feelings, and then being able to move forward from there. And then last week we talked about seeing thoughts as thoughts. So if you were with us last week, I read a series of sentences, and as I read each sentence, your interpretation of what I was saying changed. And what it showed is that as we get bits of information, we make meaning out of them. But what we don't realize is that when we just get partial pieces of information, we create our own meaning, and it isn't necessarily the truth or what's actually happening or reality. It's what we think is happening, and that creates our thoughts. I also did a little example where I had two different interactions with a coworker after something that left me in a good mood and after something that left me in a bad mood. And what we found from this little experience is that when you have a good mood, you tend to have positive thoughts, positive reactions. When you're in a negative mood, you tend to have more negative thoughts or negative reactions, or vice versa. Your negative thoughts and your negative reactions fuel a negative mindset or mood, and those positive emotions and those positive reactions tend to fuel a positive mindset. And what we found is that moods and feelings have a strong influence on our mindset, and that's why we're trying to break that cycle of negative thought, because when we have positive thoughts, we tend to have a more positive mindset. So this week, we're actually going to look at identifying your personal top 10 most unhelpful thoughts. And so these are thoughts that you might find that you have regularly, but by looking at your specific pattern of unhelpful thoughts, you are going to be able to set up an early warning system to help prevent yourself from relapsing. Again, the main focus of the Mindful Way workbook is for depression, but we're also talking about burnout, we're talking about stress, we're talking about anxiety, and setting yourself up for a success and identifying what are my warning signs, what are my triggers that cause me to kind of spiral out of control and fall into this depth of despair. So this week, and this obviously can be more than 10, but you want to start with 10 and you want to start writing down. It'd be helpful to write down, or I can link the actual workbook page for this, and it can be continuing. You might think of 3 things right now, and then you might think of more later on, but starting to write down what are things that I tend to think about. And so I filled this out a couple years ago at a different job, and my first 2 thoughts were, my boss doesn't do anything. I feel like I do everything on my own. And this resident is always so negative, and that tends to affect me. And also identifying when you have these thoughts, what is the tone that you hear them in your head? And my was generally that I seemed frustrated or irritated with that thought, or that was the mindset that I was in. Now, once you've written all of those down, we're going to go back to that 3-minute breathing space, which we've come back to again and again. It's the most important practice in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy because it's so easy to do. All you need is 3 minutes and your breath to do it. But this time, you're going to use it when you find that you are experiencing unpleasant feelings and that you're starting to be overwhelmed with those feelings. You need a minute, you need to step aside and focus on bringing yourself back using that breath as an anchor. If you still have those negative thoughts after your breathing space, we have 3 options. You can either continue on with your day and hopefully have shifted your perspective even just a little bit to help you get through the rest of the day or the next hour or the next 10 minutes. Or you might continue to be mindful about how that feeling is then projected into the body, looking for that tension or that tightness or those sensations and trying to identify the underlying emotion and feeling that is giving birth to that thought and causing those sensations in the body. Or you might decide to just focus on those negative thoughts themselves and explore them a little bit more and let them move forward by doing a couple different options. And so ways to see your thoughts differently. You can simply watch that thought come and go, let it move across your mind like the movie screen. You can choose to write it down. Sometimes writing things down can help them leave your mind. It can be extremely powerful to get it out on paper. You can remind yourself that those negative thoughts are just mental events and thoughts and are not necessarily the truth. You can start to see if the thought that you're having, going back to that my top 10 unhelpful thoughts, is one of those thoughts that you tend to have, so you can start breaking that pattern cycle there. Or you can focus with kindness and compassion on that feeling, and again trying to find how is that feeling or emotion linked to the thought that I am currently having. By doing this, we're setting up that early warning system that I was talking about. And what we're doing is we're trying to prevent that spin out into depression or anxiety or burnout or stress, which is probably pretty common right now with everything going on in the world. So starting to create your relapse signature. So one list is going to be those 10 unhelpful thoughts that you have or more. Maybe you have more, maybe you have less, but writing that down. And then starting to identify those warning signs. So some things that you might experience or might start to notice when you're spiraling down might include sleeping more or sleeping less, feeling more exhausted than you typically do, feeling maybe more exhausted even though you're sleeping more, not wanting to deal with business, not wanting to see people, seeing negative thoughts and feelings start to take hold of you and not being able to find your way out of them, giving up on exercise, maybe eating more or eating less, becoming irritable with yourself, becoming irritable with others, putting things off, procrastinating. Obviously, this isn't an all-encompassing list, but these are some common things that people tend to find are patterns that mean things are starting to get out of control. It's also helpful to include someone that you trust, whether that's a significant other, a spouse, a child, a close friend, for them to know that these are your warning signs so that they can notice it and respond and help you respond in a way that's positive instead of react to it and spiral more out of control. And then you also want to look for your triggers, and these can be small things, these can be big things, they can be external things, they can be internal things, but starting to write down, these are my warning signs and these are the triggers that I have. When you do this, then you're going to create my early warning signs, or what they call your relapse signature. So the 5 signs that tell me that my life is spinning out of control, or that depression, stress, anxiety, burnout is going to take a hold of me again are, and write down those for you in particular. These are my personal warning signs of how I know things are starting to get out of control and that I need to make a change. So your homework for this week are to do those 2 lists, to write down your top 10 unhelpful thoughts, as well as creating a list of 5 things that are your early warning signs or your personal triggers that you know things are getting out of hand as far as leading into depression, anxiety, stress, or burnout. And on top of that, again, coming back to that 3-minute breathing space and using it as much as you can when you feel like unpleasant feelings are starting to take hold and that things are spiraling out of control and you can't focus on anything else. And remembering that a breathing space basically means that we start to become aware. We use that breath to center ourselves, focus just on the breath itself, closing the eyes if you need to, feeling the abdomen expanding and contracting as we breathe, and using that to center yourself and bring your awareness. And then you're going to expand that awareness to the body as a whole, noticing how the tension or sensations in your body are, noticing your posture, noticing your facial expressions, loosening the jaw. A lot of times we hold that tension in our jaws. And then from there, regathering ourselves and allowing ourselves to move forward into the next minute, hour, day, and taking that to help us move forward. Thank you so much for joining me. Next week, we are going to jump into our last segment. It won't be our last week, but our last segment of this Mindful Way workbook. And it's going to be kindness in action. So bringing a kindness to yourself and those thoughts to help us move forward, to help us continue with our plan of preventing depression, anxiety, unpleasant feelings, and everything else. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope that you have a wonderful and mindful Monday, and we'll see you next week.